process of working, and this fits in very much with this idea that I've been developing about imaginative collaboration, because I quite often do work with art from the past, or some of the artists are even still living, like Carolee Schneemann, the piece I've developed to work with her. And she's one of the key points of a collaboration for me is that you do work that you never would do on your own, that you couldn't do on your own. So at the same time as I was doing those drawings, I started making some maquettes. Not maquettes as in I'm going to make them up in a sculpture, they're more like sketches really, sketches using found materials. I was just looking at Anticlea and her energy, so I was using found objects. These are bones from Bardsey Island. You know, Bardsey seemed to really key in with my ideas about Anticlea, maybe because it's got a kind of mythological feel about it. So the bones have the shape of that spiral of ghosts, and picking her out and leaving the other figures out. I'm thinking about Deleuze talking about as soon as you've got more than one figure in a group, in a painting or a drawing, then it becomes figurative, and it becomes, which he relates to, narrative and illustration. Yeah, I try to bring in anything that I want. As you say, if I see it and it reminds me of what I'm doing, or it seems to fit in, and I'll use it, like the bones and the husks and things, and then I'll make sense out of it afterwards. It's just because it seems to be needed. But it's also that kind of playful thing, isn't it? You try this, try that, see what works, and I'll keep some of it. Yeah, right. So this piece is not set up because I can't do it in here, but if I just move it around, you get an idea of how it works in the right kind of position. But if you can imagine it with some kind of spiralling movement coming out of the floor and going into the wall, that is the idea of this piece, which is, in my mind, the idea of Anticlea escaping from the underworld and coming up into this world, going into it. Okay, well this is probably something that you'd be more familiar with from my work, the medium, this rubber inner tubes that I use an awful lot, and which I relate to a kind of metaphor for skin in a kind of industrial way, which goes against the energy of the other piece, but it's the same shape, this spiral that I was talking about. The feel is really important to me, as much as the ideas. It's this kind of responding to the material and doing what it wants. And when you turn it inside out, you get this sort of powdery, softer, more skin-like material, yes, which for me suits this idea. So I think I will turn them all inside out. Yes, it's visual thinking. So I'm trying to escape language in all my art, is trying to push the ideas better than I can think them, because I'm not happy with what I'm coming up with in terms of ideas. So I'm trying to think. It seems to me that the visual art gives you an opportunity to push ideas further. I think that's part of the role in society of art, that it kind of reflects the thinking of the contemporary period, but I think it helps push it along, and it's part of the dialogue, it's part of what makes change, and that's the bit that I want to be involved in, the part that's making change rather.
That I can't work quickly, or perhaps don't want to work quickly, and although you say these are quite carefully worked out in advance and planned, that's not an element of them that I hope will be too visible. People do often say to me, I mean, for instance, I've just been showing you the acrylic versions of watercolours that I painted, and sometimes if people see both, they say, oh, I like the acrylic, I like the freedom of it, you know. And my answer to that is usually that spontaneity requires a lot of hard work, which sounds like a contradiction, but I mean, that's how I feel about it. So there's a lot of ancillary influences. Not consciously, I couldn't actually point out that, that this has any meaning, or that has any meaning, or this has any meaning. But sure. I think perhaps one of the reasons that I've painted them all in quite different colour sets is to do with creating some sort of mood. And I'm mystified a bit by colour. I think I mentioned in the blog that I don't feel I have any real control over colour, so I'm interested to see what happens when I do put a predominant colour, an unrealistic colour if you like. So I mean, these are quite unreal colours, but these are the colours that I eventually decided on to paint this corner of the picture, because it's not real. It's not real, and I'm interested in seeing how I react to things which aren't real, but which are obviously a tree and the sky. Yeah, it is. And again, I was interested in the colour. I mean, as I've said in the journal and in the blog, I don't feel that I'm a colourist, but I'm interested in colour, and I do love the way, I mean, this combination of colours was very taken up by Matisse and by Gauguin even, of a violet and yellow. These were, or the sort of light mauve and yellow, these were two colours which the Nabis were particularly interested in. Because I think I am going to call this Arcadia. And, you know, anybody who knows about painting will know about the 18 Arcadia Ego, the Poussin painting. Usually translated, I am in Arcadia also. And his painting is of a little group of peasants tracing the writing on a tomb, big stone tomb, which says Et in Arcadia Ego, which is generally interpreted as meaning that death is telling you that he is here anyway.
I thought, well, I remember this place in Liverpool when I was living in Liverpool, Henry Willis and son. Really, one of my fellow students actually told me about it, and he said you should go there, but I never did, because his dad had something to do with the place, I think. And I remembered about this place, and so I looked him up and organised a visit, and which was quite recent. And it's the most amazing place, you know. It was a total revelation, you know. It was, well, as I said, you know, these people were amazingly skilled people, and but what engaged me was the way that they had adapted certain things or made certain things in order to do certain jobs, or to make certain jobs easier. Well, in terms of making that machine that I was talking about, it is different, because I've got to sort it out. It's got to work. It's not a matter of, say, like for instance, these are just not pieces yet. They could be, but they might not be. But so I've got this piece here, and this piece here, and I put that on the end of it, and it seems to have a certain kind, seems to work. Similarly, with this one, a shorter piece, I've done the same thing, and it's about playing around with things until things work for you, and it's like anything. I mean, that's how artists work. But this is, which I've just talked about, this is a piece in itself. Okay, I guess that, you know, when Duchamp showed his urinal, the only thing about it was different about it was its title, because it was, you know, meurtre, as it were. But it was a urinal. I mean, this is a wind controller, or a wind catcher. Because, you know, there's something demon Cornish about that, and from Matisse, like, about that. And you were asking me about how artists, you know, how they resonate with you, and, you know, if you look at other artists' work. Well, you do it all the time, of course. But it's interesting to note that Diebenkorn absolutely worshipped Matisse, and he was always constantly looking at Matisse. And, you know, from looking at his work, you can see the real connection in both his figurative and his non-figurative work. Because Diebenkorn is one of those artists that is really interesting, who kind of dipped in and out of figuration and abstraction. I mean, there's no such thing as abstraction, really. I mean, abstraction is just.
I agree.
Absolutely, it's just a term. It's making, whether you're a figurative painter or an abstract painter, whatever. Really, it's just a term, and it's making things work. Really.
Almost never, I've probably never done the whole thing, so perhaps it's come from seeing these cathedral things where he's not showing the whole cathedral.
Okay.
Cutting off the towers.
Yeah.
He's taking little parts of it. There's some descriptions in these, but it's been very poetic and perhaps to do with music as well in some ways, you know, that he's choosing colours that aren't actually there. It's supposed to be just a grey stone building, you know. And up to the lights, he's painting the lights, but he's painting, he's interested in the envelope, he calls it the atmosphere around it, between him and the building.
You use an oil painter?
I do generally use oil,
Yeah.
because I have recently used quite a lot of acrylic, not so much for finished work, but for sketching outside and that kind of
Right.
thing. It's very useful. But I think oil generally has a bit more depth to it, but I think some of the work and some of the frustration, I think I pick it up from some of the things Monet said as well, is that you're excited when you're doing something, and then the next day you think, oh, it's sort of sunk in a bit, you know. It's you can do it, you know. And especially I think when you're working with these sorts of complementaries and you're trying to get the paints to work together. And, you know, if I put my glasses on and I look closely, I can see that there is a lot of texture in some of them as well. You know, there's a build-up of texture there.
Very much so. This is
These, isn't it? Yeah. And it's in this one as well there. There's sort of an almost primitive feel to some of them, you know, that I haven't drawn. Well, I haven't drawn them at all really. I've just gone straight into painting with them. And you can build up with some impasto. And these now I've sort of soaked them overnight with a bit of turps on them and drained the turps out, which leaves you with a very wet sort of paint.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know if you can see up here.
Yeah.
It's really sort of it's sort of hard to work with, but you can work at it and sort of manipulate it and change the form a bit as you're painting away, you know. Just one blue, pink. These are the colours in the Cardiff painting really.
Yeah.
There's also a dark as well, isn't there? You know, recently I've started using black, which I don't know if it's an impressionist colour at all, but I thought you needed a really strong dark in them as well, you know. I suppose what I'd really like to do is to make it, see that as almost an abstract thing going on, isn't it? And I'd quite like to go a step further, and so it becomes almost unrecognisable, but I don't know if I can do that.
So I saw this this plaque by Domier, which was of a line of refugees, and I was very struck by it because the sculpture was a different kind to what I was used to in Renaissance art. This was almost like a cubist, and I think it was just came out of him naturally. He wasn't an intellectual, I don't think. Anyway, when I started on this project, I thought I'd try and do a sculpture more in his style, in that of the line of refugees, because it's very like the woman in the painting I'm doing, the laundress with her burden. I think she's trying to get home before the rain starts, or just in a hurry to get on with the washing so that she can earn some money, buy some food. It's not bas relief, it's quite deep relief actually. And I was comparing it to a Renaissance one, taken from the baptistry doors in Florence by Alberti, and they were considered the sort of peak achievement of the Renaissance. And I don't particularly like them. To me, they're rather like sort of sculpture versions of paintings or drawings with dolls stuck on top. They're more like a stage set.
Yeah, okay.
The backdrop in the stage, a curtain, you know, with a bit of sculpture, very, very low relief, shallow relief, and then little figures stuck on top. And the Daumier one was, all the figures are much more integrated with the background and much more close. It's like somebody who does it every day as his own language. He just sort of seems to come out of his fingers, rather the way the paint emerges in his paintings from a sort of muddy background almost.
Yes.
And he saw it and he understood her predicament.
Yeah.
Because he knew the poor he lived in. I empathise, try to empathise when I'm painting with the person I'm painting.
Sure. It would be a bit of a conceptual piece of work, a different approach for your painting, because you would not, presumably you would not know the
well, I wouldn't know,
sister of the
that's right.
subject.
This is one of the struggles I've had, and one of the bits of writing I put in is a few paragraphs about my problem with conceptual art, because to me a piece of visual art speaks to what you could see without being told. You don't need any words to understand what the Daumier is about. At least
I was in Spain for part of the summer, and I set up a studio in the shade which looked across to the house I was staying in, and the house had a very strong pink end wall on the outside terrace and a lovely blue-grey wall. So these are actually quite accurate of the colours, and I decided, and in a way they're slightly influenced by the architect Louis Barragan as well, and so I decided that I would use those two colours and those shapes as a starting point for this body of work that I made when I was out there. So I set up these large sheets of watercolour paper on a board, and I was looking across to these shapes, and there's a kind of diagonal of the roof as well. So I was very much thinking I could use this shape, this area of shapes and colours as a starting point, and then just to see what happens. So this is very much me using something that exists, but as a starting point, and finding a process of simplification and balancing colour and tone. So the way that through painting you're kind of refining and finding qualities that you wouldn't find if you were just to copy from nature, which I'm not actually interested in doing, or were to set yourself something that you knew you were going to do before you started it. So I love this whole exploration and intuitive response, call and response that painting gives you. And I wanted each of them to have a different quality as well. So these are some of the paintings that I made on paper after starting this whole project on the two Barragan paintings on canvas. And I'm using khadi paper, which is an amazingly thick handmade Indian paper, which is like fabric really. You can really wash it out, and it takes a lot of hammering. So this is Barragan 1, painting on canvas, and these are the pages here for Barragan 1. So it gives you an idea as to how I'm putting a swipe of colour for each time that I add a colour, and some of the pages go on for more than one day, and some of them go on over a period of days. So just one page for each day. And this is then the second series on paper, which I think are actually becoming more successful because they're getting much simpler. So actually throughout this whole process I'm trying to constantly keep it simple rather than allow it to be cluttered, and also to keep this lovely sort of saturated quality. This one here has got too much, this bit here, the rest is okay, but this bit here is too plasticky in my opinion. I don't like that quality, but I really like it when it's kind of matte and stained. And so these are the two paintings that relate still to Badagan, and they have their appropriate book pages as well.
Some monoprints, yeah.
Yes, as I was saying, they are purely experimental, so some of them don't look like very much at all. Like one was A Head of a Hound by Peter Boyle, a Dutch artist. And then there was a big hunting scene, and in the foreground of the hunting scene there was a really emaciated hunting hound. Sometimes when I was doing the monoprint process, I found that the drawing on the perspex was more successful than the actual prints, so I kept a couple of them. Yes, that method isn't drawing, it's working on the plate, inking up and then removing ink with, depending on what kind of printing ink. If it's water-based, you just use a damp piece of rag. It sort of reminded me of some paintings by Julian Schnabel. He used X-rays in some of his paintings at one stage. Yeah, well, because I've gone along several different avenues, one of them has been looking at plants which are growing in this vicinity on this farm, which I found out that most of them had healing properties, so they connected in with the healing theme. Well, last year I decided just for 1 month, which was June 2015, to study what wildflowers were growing on the land at Pantabiath in Revile. And it just so happens that my husband grew up on this farm, and he's often spoken of his father collecting plants, leaves and herbs to make ointment out of, mainly for treating animals' ailments.
I mean, he was an enormous sort of, almost reverently anyway, Cézanne was important to him. And obviously the early stages of Cubism were present there. And the sort of underlying geometry, if you like, of the visible world in a way. And also I read recently somebody had actually even sort of, in talking about his work, had referenced Kandinsky. And again, the sort of, that notion of the geometry and getting behind the reality of formal three-dimensional things is certainly, I mean, Cézanne engaged with it all the time in a way, and the fact that it preempted what became synthetic and well, Cubism basically. And so in a way there's sort of this on the edge of abstraction, I think, in what's gone on, and I suppose that's the direction it seems to be moving in at the moment. But also, in addition, from the drawings, of course, another concern that I was missing was something to do with colour. So the recent stuff started to try and sort of explore that, and not necessarily copying exactly the colours in his work, but actually looking at the function of colour in relation to the formal elements that I'm dealing with, and their relationship to the background, figure and ground, if you like. As far as the recent work's concerned, I became particularly interested in, I was neglecting some of the sort of curved elements in the paintings, and started to, apart from verticals and horizontals, I started to introduce the curve. I mean, it's as simple as that, and in many ways it was inevitable if I'm actually responding to a particular painting by Morandi. They exist, and it was how to negotiate them. They do actually have an impact in the outcome, because they actually seem to slow things down in terms of looking at the forms. I think the drawing process allows me to think, as it does, as you said, as for many artists. I mean, it's a way of thinking that is predominantly visual, but at the same time there are certain sort of issues that have arisen in this particular instance to do with the function of the tonal area, the way that objects are stacked in space or across a surface. And the fact that they're small means that I'm sort of able to follow on a sequence of drawings, and there's a continuity between the work in terms of time. You know, I can sit down in a day and actually do quite a lot of drawing, with one thing following on from the next. It's a sequential thing, and occasionally there's a disruption because you discover something that you didn't expect, and then it can start to take on a different direction or suggest further means of developing the stuff that you've got.
Well, I, in a sense, whenever we make a picture, and I've got a little bit in the habit of doing this, is in a sense you people your pictures with yourself. And I think there's something about this woman that is a little bit like me. Like being made of skin and string and stuff like that. You know, people always saying, "Oh, you're so tiny, you're so thin, there's nothing of you." And so I've attenuated myself. It's a kind of otherworldly colour, isn't it? Because she has an otherworldly, as she does in Apple's pictures, she looks a bit otherworldly, if B-movie-ish. But this one's definitely a fake character, which she's not me, obviously, but and she wears the white gloves, that she's very careful what she touches. And she's got this familiar with her, who may or may not give a toss about much at all, really. And he's a witness. But it's quite interesting to me because of the whole fourth wall thing, that there's also somebody else, because someone's looking at this. Who are they? Where are they? And what's their viewpoint? I mean, they were there when it was happening, but they're not. They're the theatrical fourth wall, the invisible wall, the audience signatures, and you can also make quite a good attempt at drawing like other people draw. I would say painting is more hard, but you can, and then but I think what I've done now is, after years of sort of not quite knowing who I was, I think I've found a little bit more of a way to be me. It's been a bit different from the project, because I tried to stick to it, very much stick to it and get somewhere. But over here, there's a whole rows of sketchbooks that I'm just constantly drawing in and using my imagination and just drawing out of my head. And usually, like, I think George Brack said this, that when he didn't know what to do, you don't imagine people like George Brack ever being at a loss, like we all are sometimes. He would go and seek through all his old sketchbooks, and that's what I do. And it's a rare thing that I can't think, oh, I've forgotten all about that little drawing. I could go back to that idea. I go back to the idea rather than the drawing. So it's a way of taking notes and remembering what you might like to come back to in the future. So that's my usual modus operandi. That's what I do. I have this sort of resource then, my own little resource, to go back, even like something from 3 or 4 years ago that I never really capitalised on.
This is peat, which I've been experimenting with. I wanted to make it into a solid form, so I used one of my. You can get different sort of textures with different kind of qualities of peat. So these are very experimental. They're made into small boat shapes. I'm using one of my lead boats as a former, so I actually form them inside the lead boat. And that's quite important as well, because both these materials are found up in the quarries, all around where I've been walking. The reason I use a boat is because it's how the slate has been shipped away to other parts of the world. So that this area of land was cut out by some authority on the map that said in 1951 it was not of a high enough standard. The natural beauty, it was actually not beautiful enough to be included within a protected national park. And as I have still got a piece that's missing, which is quite a difficult bit of land to get to, right to the very top of the boundary. And I'm wondering whether to keep that as a missing piece. It has taken me into sort of different areas, in that it's taken me into the ground a lot more, because a lot of what you see inside the tuff, so to speak, it's a horrible way to describe it, but is the inside of the land coming out where they've mined. So there's huge evidence of just the inside of the land. And when I study what is Blanifacinium, what the slate tips are made from. So this is a bit of slate that, believe it or not, I did actually find. I came across randomly. It's a cut slate, it's been processed, I think, but I found it on an old tip, and it's got this extraordinary iron parietes in it. And the other name for iron parietes is fool's gold, which I feel is a really interesting metaphor to work with. Quite a cutting metaphor really to work with in the context of this boundary and the cutout of the boundary. So I actually had a map made quite early on, which I decided to call. You can actually ask to have them called certain things. So I called it Blanifacinium Circle. So it is based on Blanifacinium, and I've had it in Welsh, which is really interesting approach. I think what has helped me with this is that it's helped me to really, really focus on my own working process, and that I have always done that. I've always gone back and forth, but not consciously made myself be as intuitive on the land as this has encouraged me to do.
Yeah, it's very process driven, and the paintings are, they're not pre-planned at all in any kind of a way. I make the supports myself. I have an idea with regard to the shape as to what might make a good painting, but by the time I've come to prime everything, prepare it, I've forgotten any kind of ideas I have. So I'm starting always cold with like a blank sheet of paper, as it were. I'll set off either using a colour scheme that I arrived at from a previous series, or that some colours that I kind of recall, and I think, well, I'll try and get back to that one. But it's completely to do with mixing the colour here on the palette and then applying onto the painting. There's very little mixing on the painting that takes place. So there are kind of almost drawn shadows and drawn elements. I mean, in this painting, for example, you've got this allusion to a kind of a shadow from the top section, which is a completely sort of artificial kind of a device. I wouldn't normally put that in, although that three-dimensional aspect of the paintings is quite a feature of the work. And I think that that's something that's happened with the point I've got to with regards to brush mark and brush stroke, is that everything's sort of become almost subservient to this investigation of what I call pictorial colour, so that to actually have a sort of scribbled mark or a scribbled element in the painting actually becomes difficult to put in, because of course that affects the operation of the colour, intrinsically. So in order to maintain the integrity and dynamic of the painting, one's got to a point whereby the brushwork is extremely considered. But I mean, that's painting. You put that over a yellow ochre or something, because it's a semi-transparent colour, so you would get the brush mark showing very, very well, showing through if it was just one kind of layer. Quite often I will build the red up, for example, build that colour up a little bit just to sort of maintain its kind of, to maintain that opacity. But also the primed, the white primed canvas is also important to the operation of the final colour, because whatever's underneath the paint will affect the visual appearance of that paint. It's sort of like hidden. It's what's revealed and what's hidden, I think, in the paintings that's kind of interest to me. I don't care for the term abstraction at all, or abstract painting. I've never seen my work as being abstract at all. And I do like that sort of reference to the underlying, to the hidden, what's visible and what's hidden, and I like that kind of play. And that's really what the paintings are about.
For me, it's really important. I mean, I'm really interested in things that are repeated, and I like sort of mass production, and I'm a printmaker, and I like to do more than one of things anyway. So one of the things that I discovered I can do on the iPad, which I can also do with bits of rubber and things, is just sort of make a really simple stamp. And so I started to sort of just look at it in terms of pattern at this point, but by repeating it, it started to build up into something almost like a Kerwin Press bookend, or Borden Revilius type thing in a very different format. Part of my practice is that thing of a narrative. It's kind of almost illustrative, but it's not illustration, because I don't work necessarily as a commercial illustrator, but the work is illustrative, and I do like the tradition of narrative work, whether it's Ken Kiff, or whether it's Paul Arago, or whether it's going right back to Giotto and Dura and those kind of narratives. That's always been a real sort of inspiration to me. I like to use found materials, so this is an interview by Bill Grundy, 1976, with the Sex Pistols, which was a free thing from The Guardian years ago, and I just really liked the format of the book, and I used that as a starting point for some drawings of plants. Well, each process has its own quality of mark making, and so you really have to think carefully about how you make a mark for lino, or for any print actually, because it's permanent and it's there, and it takes a long time to cut out and get it ready to print. Whereas with the drawings, and this is why I've always been really interested in drawing processes as well as printmaking processes, but the drawing process can be relatively quick and immediate, whereas to make an image, a printed image, takes a lot longer, and there's that whole kind of thought process behind it, in that you need to it's more of, I suppose it is more of a craft design process in a way, even though it's a fine art. I think that's definitely a 21st century artist's approach, is that I have a certain sense of freedom to be able to make the work that I want to make, and it's not a commission for somebody else, and I suppose.
No, I mean, I think initially there was this sort of urge to free this animal from its confines, if you like, and put him in this outside space. Now it's an odd one. It's this sort of, I have a certain sort of resentment for this elephant to a certain degree, and maybe this subject matter that I'm dealing with at the moment of poisoning a poor animal with mango leaves is this sort of, this process that I'm going through. But yeah, he is sort of placed in the outside world, and it's sort of, this seems more of a wild creature, a wild animal now, as opposed to a circus act, if you like. Towards an end of producing a body of work for me, editing is crucial, and sometimes editing means actually destroying the work and just picking out individual pieces that read well together, that sort of creates some sort of coherency. With oil, there's a certain sort of richness to the colour that I feel is sort of difficult to sort of emulate with certain other synthetic paints. But not only that, it's just something that's really familiar to me now. I've been using oil for years now, and for me, the idea of risk is I'm always sort of dabbling in this area of failure, and I often feel that if I'm not on that sort of fringe between sort of failure and sort of just scraping something, then I'm failing. In the sense that, sometimes that texture isn't welcomed as much, whereas other times there's not that much you can do with it because it's so sort of thick. But yeah, with this, I'm in this sort of stage of putting on and taking away at the moment. So I'm trying to sort of collect, if you like, this sort of colourful palette, but there will be a point very soon where a lot of it will be sort of cut off, and there will be more structure, I should imagine, to it. But I'm interested in this arm, in what this gesture that this arm is doing. It's sort of almost emulating a trunk of this elephant. So it's almost a sort of a Frankenstein thing going on with it, in that it's sort of becoming the elephant or something. It's sort of odd.
Fantastic, John.
Look at these in Paris Mountain. So I actually mixed that up. Two things I'm starting to do with this is I'm going to start to rub this into some of the areas here. I'm not sure if I'm going to do it with oil, and then I'm going to put it outside and I'm going to let it rust, so you actually get rusted colours, natural rust colours, against organic colours from the mountain.
Are you going to have the relief aspect with them as you have with the bigger one?
With some of them, yes, others, no. I mean, I quite like just the simplicity of that. I think that's quite interesting. I mean, and what I can do is can just explore different possibilities. I could make things protrude even further. I mean, the possibilities just from one image are endless. But one thing I want to explore, I'm going to try and print some of these up, and when I print them up, using medium oil and Paris mounted pigment, or straightforward strong black from Metagulo. I'll rub ink all over them, wipe them off, print them. Now before I actually, after I've done enough prints, what I'm going to then do is to take them, outside and let them rust naturally. The more I was actually looking at the images I've done, I feel some of them can be a little bit contrived. They're just literally copies of it. So what I'm trying to do now is make the images more part of the process. So it's process of nature versus process of material. But the nature can actually start to intervene within my process.
I can do the figurative work, it's not a problem, and there's a certain satisfaction in being able to reproduce a scene. So I call these snapshots because that's what they are, and it's so that is contrived because you know what you're planning to do, but you don't know what that is. You know that you've got a plan, but you don't know what it is. Sure. And then you do, and then you have to step back and then come and look at a later time. There isn't a contrivance, there's not even particular cleverness, you know, there's just this response to something that I've held within me since I've seen that place, taken in those impressions. This is Icelandic soil,
Okay.
and I brought it home for the colour.
Yeah.
So I've got that there, and these are Icelandic crow feathers. So this, and that again serves to remind me, and this painting is about that turmoil in the landscape, and it's got these milky blue areas which are reminiscent of the geothermal areas, the hot springs and the geyser, and then just the colour of the rocks that I could remember, and I painted it and it was all going a bit too wild, I thought, so I had to wipe some of it off, and I've left it. I was quite pleased with it, I like the colours. So that's really the painting I like.
Yeah,
really
it's got a nice structure to it, hasn't it?
It's just
These
happened.
big areas kind of balance.
It's just happened, and I wouldn't want to touch it again, actually. If there's something that looks like it needs resolving, obviously at the time when I'm painting, I can do it. But to come back and then say this needs, and to know what it needs, I'm not very trusting of my ability to do that. I like it, but it's also very difficult because you can get lost. It's easy to get lost when you're working from the intuition. Yeah, really, like I said, I think I said once, it's the love of paint. It's just that delight in paint. And when I very first felt paint on the end of a brush, I was in a community arts course before I'd done my foundation. I'd only ever drawn before, I'd not painted, and I got paint on the end of my brush, and it was like aligned to my, I don't know, it was like, it was amazing, just the feel of it and what I could do with it. Yeah.